What's your superpower?
It's the wonderful blend between them. It's not a one or the other. It's not that the brain and the curiosity, because, oh, definitely I have that. And I leaned into that more when my physical body was not able to do the physical activities that I wanted. DNA really is the information blueprint of our bodies, of our cells, of who we are. It holds information.
So I'm very excited for today to have Dr. Lara Varden with us. Now, before we started, she was kind enough to reveal that she's a polymath. And that's something I want everybody to understand before we get to the true brilliance that she brings to the world through her knowledge. So, Dr. Lara, take us back to your childhood and how did you go from there into this incredible DNA science educator?
Well, that is an incredible, wonderful story. I've lived quite an interesting life so far in the first half century, a little more. But first, just for your audience, as far as like a polymath, they're probably like, what the hell is that? Is she really good at calculus or something? And really, what a polymath is, it's an individual whose knowledge spans a number of subjects, really drawing on very complex bodies of knowledge to solve problems. And, kind of like a jack of all trades type of thing, because I have done a lot of different things in many different areas of my life. But I'll tell you, when I was a kid, I just had way too much energy. My mom would constantly say, go outside, go run it off. And I loved to exercise. I loved sports. I didn't like watching sports. I liked participating in them. And I did everything. I was a swimmer. I was on the swim team and actually went some major swim teams, on our swim team, some
Yeah.
major swim meets before I was 8 years old. I was in the 8 and under category because I was a little fish. I loved being in the pool. I loved being in the water, but also the running. I ended up getting in so many different sports in school and track. But I'll tell you, when I was 4 years old, one of my girlfriends asked me to go to her ice skating with her, to go to a free skate. It's like, okay. So I went, absolutely fell in love. I mean, I loved figure skating. That was probably my favorite sport. And so I ended up, I lived in Northern New York. I was only about 45 minutes away from Lake Placid, where the 1932 and 80 Winter Olympic Games were held. So that was one of my rinks. I had a couple of coaches, like in Lake Placid, as well as in Plattsburgh, New York, where I grew up. So I spent a lot of time skating, ended up becoming a professional figure skater later on. But, during that time, I competed and I competed with kids at that time, my counterparts who ended up going on to the Olympics. Christy Yamaguchi and some of these other major skaters. I skated with them when I was young, so there are reasons why I didn't go into the Olympics, but I did have a couple out in Colorado that wanted to train me, but I would have had to have moved to Colorado, and my parents were like, no, because I was actually at the 1980 Winter Olympics as like a little rink rat helping out, and I watched the U.S. Russian game, the hockey. So anyway, I very, very active. And so as I went through and working into graduation and going to college, I also loved music. In my church, I sang. I played the violin. I started that when I was in third grade, when you had to pick an instrument. And I ended up getting a partial scholarship to university for voice and violin. And I was a theater major, and I loved it. Because I loved the performance. I loved to do that, and just enjoyed that thoroughly. Life changed up a little bit. I met my first husband and ended up switching my major and ended up graduating with an education degree. I became a teacher. a certified teacher for New York State, and went that path. And I'll tell you, you'd think that was such a different type of career choice. But to be honest, as an educator, what are we but performers, but for an educational purpose? You know, you can have the best information in the world, but if you don't know how to deliver it to capture the attention of those listening and to hold their attention, then that information can get lost. And that can make the difference in people's lives, in your students' lives, you know, to excite them in a particular subject, which can absolutely change or enhance the trajectory of their life in what they do with it. That one teacher, they can usually look back and go, oh yeah, it was Mr. Smith, and you know, he did this and he was so excited about this subject, and it just made me, you know, become the, you know, fill in the blank that you say. And it's the same thing for what I am doing now in the healthcare field, in teaching people about their DNA, in about health, how to take care of themselves. It is exciting them because it's exciting to me. I am so passionate about this, and I constantly dig in and use the experience and the education I have in my teaching, because I take these concepts of DNA and genetics, and it's just like lots of numbers and letters and a lot of big words, and it's just like, holy crap, what do you do with this? To say, this is what you do with it. And I can break it down to make it understandable at virtually any level of education or understanding, even to children. You know, I have pediatric clients, and I have them come on and I talk to them. And, you know, I give them some understanding. Maybe they don't need to know about, you know, genetics per se, but an understanding of what their parents are helping them with, and getting on that level to help them help themselves. But really, it's like, I know I took a total jump from like high school beginning to college to where I am now. But a brief part of that was when I was teaching for the state of New York. I worked in a developmental disability services center. So the population that I worked with were all legally involved. Their IQs were 70 or below, but by state law, they had to have educational services. And so I was working with them, and I got into a car accident. I got rear-ended by a 3/4-ton pickup truck with a snowplow. We were sitting at a stop sign. My husband was driving. I was in the passenger seat, and I was twisted and turned and talking to him. The guy was driving about 55 miles an hour. He was on Percocet, had just had back surgery a couple weeks before, was not supposed to be driving, but he was. And we were only a 1/4 mile from our house. And he hit us so hard that we ended up being pushed through the intersection and about 70 yards and up an incline so fast. At first, we didn't even know what happened. My ears were ringing because we were in a Suburban. Thank God, because that saved our lives, because the reconstruction artist said if we had been in a smaller car, a compact car, we would have been dead. But the concussive force of which that he hit us, and thank God we also had a trailer hitch on the vehicle. It was February 4th, okay, of 2001 that this happened. The frame took the energy, and that's why it was like a cue ball, you know, hitting it, just, you know, shot us forward. But I'll tell you, my poor body got so racked, because not only did I have that, you know, push wave of having the head jerk, but because my spine was rotated, I ended up getting muscle trauma induced scoliosis. I had 2 S's in my spine because the muscles contracted and pulled and stayed that way for, you know, that it actually pulled my spine out of alignment. I had herniated discs, ruptured discs, spinal fluid. It's where the fluid was not flowing. There was a part that it was impinged, that there was a pinch in it. I was a mess. I was actually in a wheelchair for a while. And through all of that, with all of the medications, I was on narcotic medications and other medications for nerve pain, for muscle relaxation. I was a walking pharmacy. It was terrible. I ended up having 2 open back surgeries, had cages, metal rods, plates, fusions. Most of my lumbar spine is fused. And I had so many other procedures. I can't even remember how many I had. And we're talking in cervical, the neck, thoracic, that middle spine, and even in my lumbar spine. And it was just on this cycle of haze of pain medication, going to the pain doctor, the orthopedic surgeon, all of these different doctors. And I was getting better a little bit. I had graduated to using a cane to walk. And I'm sure you could realize how difficult this was for someone who was so active, who, constantly hiking, camping, being outdoors, playing sports with my kids, doing all this to having and being in so much pain when they came to hug me, because they were only 9 and 7 at the time. When they hugged me, I would cry because it would hurt so much. They were afraid to hug me. That absolutely broke my heart. And just to shift positions in bed, I would start crying because the pain would be so bad. And I will be very vulnerable here and tell you that it really did get to a point where I was thinking, if this is going to be the rest of my life, I don't want the rest of my life. And yeah, suicide did cross my mind. Did I ever go through with it? Obviously not. My real anchor and faith, not only in God, but was to my kids. I wanted to raise them no matter what situation I was in, because I wanted to show them that you can achieve, you can move forward, you can be that beautiful, wonderful human being, even with all this trauma, with God's help, with the strength of family, friends, that support system to help. It is possible. But that also triggered me to move forward, to go, I don't want to be on this hamster wheel anymore. I need to do something where I'm empowered, where I start taking agency for my own health and move forward, because Western medicine, for as good as it is, and it can be very wonderful and very needed, but it's failing in many different ways, especially in chronic conditions. It was not allowing me to truly heal. So I took that into my own hands. And that's when I made that decision. I am going back to school, no matter how hard it is, no matter how long it takes me. I'm going to figure this out, and I'm going to heal us, because my husband got injured too, not as significantly from that one accident, but enough so where, it was still an ordeal.
Let me ask you a question here, because when we hear, and thank you for being vulnerable and sharing, a depth of story. When you were young and you're out there doing all these different activities, and obviously showing athletic prowess, but at the same time being able to do multiple different things, do you think your strength came from your brain and the curiosity that you always had that led to today? Or do you feel that your activity fed the brain? What is really your core strength? Because we've got athletes that are stuck in athletics and nothing after, and we've got brainiacs that are fantastic but really don't get involved in athletics. You did both. What's your superpower?
It's the wonderful blend between them. It's not a one or the other. It's not that the brain and the curiosity, because, oh, definitely I have that. And I leaned into that more when my physical body was not able to do the physical activities that I wanted. When I was more physical, which, by the way, I also played soccer. I leaned into that. Not that I wasn't a good student, because I was a very good student. But one thing that I say is that everything matters. Everything is connected. It's all important. They all have their aspects of strength. What it is, it's the combination. It is the blending. It is this beautiful dynamic between them and all of them, because also you have to consider the music aspect, the music, the rhythm, the universe speaks in frequencies and music. And that part really helped to enrich the brain power, my understanding in mathematics, in science, in my understanding of the geometrical structures and how different activities, different sports worked, having the foresight, when I'm running down the field and I'm, wanting to kick a goal, how am I going to maneuver? I could think ahead and see where a person might be moving based on, how they're positioning their body or shifting their weight, and then how I might go around and think ahead. And I saw this in shapes, in almost like a sacred geometry. It's just the way that my brain was bringing in aspects of the way that music works, of the way that math and science, and just the sheer joy of using my body, because it still comes down to the biological aspects and the biochemical processes of using your body, of increasing mitochondrial activity, of accessing all of these different parts. I know I know this is going on, but it's just the sheer excitement and eloquence of it, the elegance, of how our bodies are. It can be very, very complex, but also so simple.
And that's what I believe. I believe we get confused with simplicity and we're looking for the secrets. And yet they're all right there in our face. It's just we're looking for magic. But I believe the magic we seek is in the work we avoid. Because if we're willing to do it, the body is born to heal. It's born to be superhuman. And if we do what it needs, it will perform. But so we've got your story up to the point where you say, I'm going back to school. And then you've used the word DNA. You've got some different scientific words coming in right now, the mitochondria and different things. Take us to the layman level of what is DNA? Tell us about it.
Okay, so DNA really is the information blueprint of our bodies, of our cells, of who we are. It holds information. It is, you figure, all of the DNA is in every single cell in our body. And we have billions of cells. And it's all the same DNA in every single cell. It's just how that DNA is expressed that makes the organs, makes a heart, makes our skin, and not heart. Okay. It is this beautiful way of how that blueprint, that information, like a recipe book, gets read and creates this recipe, this piece of food. Okay. For example, you've got a big recipe book. That's your DNA. And on page 78, here's the recipe to make bread, the recipe to make a heart cell, okay? And you read off certain ingredients, okay? For bread, obviously, we're not going to, well, you can put in jalapenos or, other things. Maybe that was probably not the best thing because you can do a lot of things with bread. But say, certain ingredients that you include, but then there's certain ingredients that you don't. Well, that's what our DNA does. It gets turned off, it gets silenced. Some genes get silenced because we don't want all of the genes to be expressing at once. And then we have other genes that are being expressed. And that is the brilliance of our body, how it knows how to do that. So for DNA, which is made up, you can think of, how I said, like a book. Okay. So in a book, you've got pages, you've got paragraphs, you have sentences, you have words, you have letters. Well, those letters are the nucleotides. There are only 4. Okay. So you have adenine, thymine, cytosine, and guanine. Those 4 nucleotides make up all of our DNA. And it's the way that they are arranged, just like letters in the alphabet. They are arranged to make certain words. And that is part of the recipe that is made to make each of our cells, and for those cells to then turn around and make up the tissue of the organs, of the systems of our entire bodies, and this beautiful interplay between them.
What does DNA stand for?
Deoxyribonucleic acid. There's a mouthful.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's funny because we use so many expressions ASAP. We know what that means.
Right.
and just take it for granted, and yet we don't actually know. But I think putting names to things actually makes it more personal. So going back to, we're born with our DNA. We also know that through epigenetics, we have other players in our DNA. I had my DNA done through your company, the DNA company. And when I start looking back and seeing that my DNA is affected by my parents and their parents, how far back do we even know that our makeup was created?
Hundreds of thousands of years from when our ancestors, from when humans were here on Earth. We have an area of study called bioinformatics that we can actually go back and take a look at DNA from bones and from other mammals, and work it back and look at these what we call clades, groupings, and how certain genes, certain patterns have remained the same throughout. The similarities. That's why a lot of times in science, we will do research on other mammals, on monkeys or mice or ferrets or whatever it is, and making sure that there is similarities of genetics, because ultimately we want to translate that research science into use for humans.
It's fascinating because I think the discoveries and the constant new information that we're learning because of technology, but also because of education, of people pushing the boundaries of what we can learn. I was, brought up, I grew up in an environment where we didn't really look at DNA. You go to the doctor, we'd have a book, we fit into the book, and then that would be our prescription for anything that we had to do to try and get healthier. And yet that's really all changed now. How is that being received from the general population? Because it's still, we're still pushed towards modern medicine.
Well, the thing is with modern medicine, a lot of it, it's the diagnose and prescribe structure, and they don't really focus on the root causes. For example, one of the most common ones, what's the biggest killer of humans? Cardiovascular disease, heart attacks. Okay, that's the number one killer. And a lot of doctors, one of the number one prescriptive medications that are given, statins. Well, the thing is, it's that statins, they do that because they see that, oh, your cholesterol levels are high, your LDL levels are high, which are low density lipoproteins. They transport cholesterol in the bloodstream. And they're like, okay, we got to get those numbers down. You could have a heart attack. This is, problematic. Well, first of all, there are other markers that can be more indicative to cardiovascular disease outside of, just cholesterol, triglycerides, and LDLs. Okay. But oftentimes, what's the first thing they do? Write a prescription for statins. Well, statins will lower the numbers, but they don't cover the root cause. The root cause gets into the inflammation that is happening in the body. And this is where people like me come in. Functional medicine, precision medicine. Well, more so just in general. Let's go with functional medicine. Okay, holistic health. That we are not looking at the disease. We are trying to find out what's the root cause, what caused that. So a good analogy for this is when you have an arborist, say you have a tree. The tree, one of the branches is a bit diseased, the leaves, they're brown and dying, and okay, it's not looking good. We want to help it. So you have the arborist come in. Well, they're not going to go over to that tree and paint that brown leaf green. They're not just going to cut off the branch. Is that actually fixing the diseased tree? Is there going to be another branch that dies and is going to have problems? Yeah. What they do is they start looking at the roots, and what they're really focusing on and what they really dive into is the terrain, the soil. They test to see, is it acidic? Is it basic? What nutrients are there? What are missing? Because the tree is a living, growing thing, just like our bodies. So we need to stop focusing on the leaves and the branches and always chasing after that. That is what Western medicine does right now. What we need to look at, and this is what we do as functional medicine practitioners, holistic healthcare practitioners, we look at the soil, we look at the terrain, we look at what your life, what's going on that could be causing that downstream problem. We look to see at what deficiencies or insufficiencies you have in your nutrients. We're talking your food, okay? Are you getting the vitamins that you need, that your DNA needs to produce the proteins that it needs for repair?
Yeah, so this is something that when I have my DNA taken, and I know there's other programs out there that tend to claim to do certain things, 23andMe, Ancestry.com, some of the ones that I looked into, and they don't go to the depth of what you really need. It's more, showing you the book cover rather than getting into the details. But it was fascinating for me to discover that there were certain genes I was actually missing. For example, the transportation of heat out of my body. I tend to not sweat. I tend to hold it in there. And I race bikes. That's one of my passions. And I always struggled in anything over 72 degrees. And I thought it was because I was English. And so what was fascinating was seeing how personal it was to me. But this is what's even greater. Once I knew what to do to improve the health and performance in my life, which leads me to my question for you. How did you get into DNA? Because you've gone through this accident, you're suffering, you're not able to love the way you want to with your own children. And then you go, okay, I'm going to go and study health. How did it get to DNA, and how has that affected you personally?
Well, when I decided to go back to school and become a doctor, my mind was thinking a medical doctor, an MD. Okay. And at this time, it was 2010, 2011. Okay. Our youngest was a senior in high school, but he ended up skipping his senior year of high school and going into an advanced college placement program. So basically, he was a freshman in college at 16, turning 17. And so it gave us an empty nest a year early. And my husband said, "So what do you want to do now?" I said, "I want to go back to school." So I re-enrolled to get another degree. And
How
to
were you
get,
physically at that point? Were you physically healed, or were you still suffering, but you were able to be functional?
well, at this time, I had already had my second open back surgery, which was in 2009. I was having some healing. Like I said, I graduated from a wheelchair into a cane. I couldn't walk without a cane because the radiculopathy, meaning the nerve damage and nerve pain in my legs, if I stepped wrong or if I turned wrong, I would fall to the floor. So I would use a cane just for stability. And I was still on a lot of medications. I mean, we're talking, I was on a lot of narcotics. I mean, back in early 2000s, that's when Purdue Pharma and everybody else, they were handing out narcotic medication like candy. I mean, I am not one that likes medication, never did. I tried not to take the prescriptions, but the pain was just really bad. But I always shied away from and was very careful not to take too much. But either way, it was still hard to function, that executive function, that remembering. I would forget things. I would do. I mean, when I re-enrolled in school, because like I said, in medical school, you have to have your prerequisites done 7 to 9 years before your medical training. I had university, but it was 20 years old. So, and I had never taken a lot of the higher science classes like organic chemistry and physical chemistry and biochemistry and all of these others. Because as a teacher, I didn't need all of that. Yes, I took the basic stuff, but so when I re-enrolled at the university, thankfully, a lot of my lower credits, like English 101 and a lot of these basic things transferred over. But I decided I wanted to take like Bio 101, Chem 101, do all of these basic courses again, because again, it'd been 20 years. There's a lot of information, that has come up. So I took all science courses I ended up maxing out on all of the courses that were available in like the biology department, chemistry department, almost physics. I almost triple majored, but and I just thrived on it. But did I have some incapacities? Absolutely. I had to work 10 times as hard as everyone else because I didn't have the memory recall like I used to. It took me longer to process. I ended up having to have special compensation where for testing, I would need a time and a half. Okay. But I did it. And here's the thing though. As I was going through, here I was getting another degree in biochemistry, biology, pre-med. And the semester before I was supposed to graduate. So here it is, 3 weeks before finals in November, and I was supposed to graduate the following spring. I had been pushing my body so much. I had been collapsing in lab because, when you're working in lab, you're working with a lot of chemicals. So safety first. But I would shift. Remember how I told you if I shift or stepped wrong, I would fall to the ground? Well, it's kind of hard to work with some of the chemicals, reach over on the bench to grab something and have your cane. So I would do that and I would fall to the ground. I would be in so much pain that have to get and bring me to the emergency room to get a shot to get me out of that pain cycle. Well, it started happening more and more because I was standing too long. I was sitting too long in front of the computer in the lecture halls, which are not very comfortable seats, really pushing my body to the point where I was running into the ground. And so here it was 3 weeks before the end of the semester. I go to see my neurosurgeon and she was like, Lara, she said, you can't keep doing this. She said, if you keep going the way you're going, you're going to be paralyzed from your waist down because another surgery is not going to do you any good. She said, I'm medically withdrawing you from school and I want you to go heal yourself. I was like, I was bawling, half because I was in so much pain. The other half because, oh my gosh, all this work that I have done for 3.5 years to get another degree now is being pulled out from under me. And I will have to tell you, looking back now, first of all, the car accident was one of the most important catalytic points in my life. And I am extremely grateful that that happened. The other thing was when that doctor told me, you have to stop and go heal yourself. She was handing me my agency back, saying, you need to take control because that's exactly what I did. And that is what continued to propel me into what I am doing now, because I ended up going had to get out of school, and water therapy. Remember how I told you, I always loved the water, very healing medium. But also I had a quantum healing hypnosis therapy session. I walked into that session 3.5 hours later. I walked out, never used my cane again. And I got all of my medications that I had been on for 14 years in 1 month. And I have never gone back. That was in 2015. I don't take any prescription medications, well, except until just recently. I'm on hormone replacement therapy because I'm through menopause. But outside of that, no medications. And I knew when I had that healing and re-enrolled in school to finish that last, well, I had to redo that other semester, but to finish that last year, the difference was night and day. I went from being where I couldn't focus, concentrate very well, had to put in a lot of extra work, to being able to sit in class and not even have to take notes. Just that absorption of information, that interest. And I've always had an interest in genetics. I knew that that's where true medicine, finding the root cause, the personalization of the root cause of issues, that was going to be a huge piece of the puzzle. But then getting into research and being influenced by the incredible advisors and professors that I had. Remember how I had told you about it takes that dynamic professor to really help trigger that trajectory to where someone's life is going. I had that. And it's one of my genetics professor, as well as my physical chemistry professor, who was also my advisor.
What were their names?
Dr. Fadi Abdallah and Dr. Jan Tribula at State University of New York at Potsdam in New York. Yes.
Both Eastern medicine?
Well, actually, they PhDs, they're professors. And Dr. Fadi Abdallah is from Lebanon. Brilliant. He does a lot of focus on ferritin. We've did a lot of research on that. I also did water studies and published water toxicology studies with him in his lab. But he works in the chemistry department at SUNY Potsdam, and Dr. Jan Tribula is a geneticist in the biology department and teaches those courses. So brilliant, kind, just exemplary human beings, way beyond the academic information. And that's where the blending comes in, of really who they are and the space they hold and the information that they have.
I think that with everyone that I've met and done podcasts with, or even in everyday life, those that make the biggest impact is because they had to find a solution for either themselves or a family member. And what's beautiful is that discovery then becomes their purpose to help others because they understand the dynamic shift and change in life that can happen when we really let people, and I love the term, go heal yourself. We can't heal ourselves without information, otherwise we'd be doing it for the most part. But tell me some of your favorite stories of the success that you've had now taking your own life, turning it around. I remember I saw you at the convention. You walk perfectly. You would never think there was ever a problem. Tell me some of the other stories that you've got, maybe people you've worked with or stories that have come through the work that you do.
Absolutely. I do want to mention that when I had graduated summa cum laude from SUNY Potsdam and moved into Clarkson University to get my PhD, because at first I wanted an MD, but we can always get into that if there's time. But I ended up moving into a PhD. And during that research time, of course, this is 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020, pandemic time when labs got shut down and all of this other stuff. I still worked in the background because we couldn't work in the lab. But I also took advantage during that time to get back to using my body. And I ended up climbing 38 mountains in the Adirondacks of Northern New York in 2020. So I wanted to say that because I want people to realize that there's always hope. Here I had everything just totally, taken out from under me, being in a wheelchair, never being told that I was never going to walk normally again. Of course, I'm so bullheaded. I'm like, yeah, let me show you. But going from there to climbing 38 mountains to walking, and you had no idea that I had been through that type of physical trauma, that I've had those surgeries and not on any medication. So fast forwarding, working with the clients that I have, family members, as well as friends, as well as clients on privately, as well as with the DNA company. I get so many people from so many different backgrounds, so many different situations. I always start with who they are and where they are. And I get extremely complicated cases. Am I able to help them totally heal? Well, not necessarily. In some cases, I help them get much farther than they have been to get them on that trajectory. Okay. But I'll tell you, for the majority of people, they get benefits. For example, I have a 74-year-old woman who had post injuries from COVID vaccine, long COVID, and other issues. She had POTS, postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. She had just fatigue and a lot of other problems to the point where she couldn't stand up in the shower. She had to sit a lot. She'd go to Silver sneakers, but have to sit in a chair and be able to do things. It was just very difficult. Now, granted, she did have work done. She did stem cells. She did, some other extensive therapies, and those helped some, but she still couldn't walk very far. She still, couldn't really fully participate in the Silver sneakers. She was overweight. So when she came to me, we looked at her diet. We looked at her lifestyle. We looked at the toxins that she was being exposed to. We started cleaning up her terrain. We started providing her and changing her diet with foods that gave her the nutrients that she needed, that her body was desperate for. We gave her supplements to help, yes, supplement the foods. Always lean into foods first, but to supplement the foods and the nutrients that she was still deficient in. Because our bodies, we have the blueprint to repair. You can have a blueprint for a house, but if you don't have the wood, the hammer, the nails, the screwdrivers, guess what? The house is never going to be built. So just like our DNA, we've got the blueprint, but we need to provide it the protein, which really gets down to the amino acids. We have to provide it with the basic micronutrients and trace minerals, things like magnesium, potassium, sodium, and molybdenum and manganese and selenium and all of these other wonderful, words of these minerals that our body needs to have our genes express, to allow it to repair. So that's what I did for her. And we also looked at the mental aspect, the stress, the traumas, worked through them, integrated a holistic change in her life. And even her husband got in on it, where she ended up at the end of her program. She had lost 25 pounds. Her husband lost 30. She could also walk, not just walk, hike several miles. She actually went to a national park and sent me pictures saying, look where I am, look what I can do. It was that she was now able, to do her Silver sneakers, that she could, on her hike, she didn't have to make sure that there was a bench that she had to stop and sit at. This is the kind of power of supporting the body in that self-healing.
Yeah, I think it's almost like you've become the mother where you've given birth again to someone's life. And that's what I think is so dynamic. It's not just knowing, it's having the solutions once you know. Because I know there's programs out there where they'll give you a certain amount of information and you got this information, you go, well, what do I do with it? It only goes, I'm glad we're talking today because I have a dear friend who has POTS and she's suffering so badly, seizures, just constant, and they're just pumping her full of drugs and threatening or wanting to do all these different operations. And we've really got her onto a health side rather than a drug side. So I think I'm going to be having her reach out to you. But that's a whole nother thing. So I know that there's certain things that you specialize in as far as the DNA company and you leading. One of the things that I know that a lot of men suffer from is erectile dysfunction. I know you have courses on that. You're looking, is the first step to get the DNA done to understand what's happening? Or are there treatments without really knowing the DNA, but it's kind of hit and miss?
Well, yes, you actually summed that up quite well. The DNA, having your DNA 360 test done certainly provides much more clarity and specificity for what each individual needs, because definitely there are foundational things. Staying away from excess sugar, staying away from highly processed foods, getting good sleep, having clean air, water. I mean, doing the basics that because you are human, you should be doing this. But it's okay, I got that, I understand that, or I've done that, but I'm still having some problems. So this is where working with a practitioner at the DNA company, working in one of our programs, really helps to personalize, to specialize, pinpoint, going, oh, okay, so you're getting your dark leafy greens, you've got you're taking your B vitamins. And basically what I'm talking about is the methylation pathway. That MTHFR gene that people may or may not heard of. It's kind of like the sweetheart gene for methylation, but it doesn't stop there, because a lot of times, people find out, oh, MTHFR, I need methylated B vitamins. Not necessarily. With looking at other genes in the pathway for you, for the person, listening, it's not just a matter of methylated B vitamins. It's going, oh, well, wait, maybe you might need an adenylated form. It has an adenyl. It's more of the chemistry aspect, but basically saying not the methylated folate B9. You need a different form, like folinic acid, because your body can't handle all of the methyl groups as well. Because if someone is taking methylated forms and say their particular genes, and there's a couple genes in very specifically that dictate that, okay, if you are over methylating yourself, you could have symptoms like anxiety, insomnia, anxiousness, and totally not know that might be the reason for it. You may think it's something else and think, oh my gosh, I'm going crazy. I don't know what's going on. And that's totally being ignored, where that might be the main culprit. But how would you know if you don't know your genetics?
Yes, so we'll stick with erectile dysfunction right now, because I know that's a huge thing. There's the blue pill, there's all the different drugs that we're thrown to make up, like you said, correct for a moment, not correct for life. How much of it, and goes back to DNA, is physical, and how much of it is psychological? And is that what DNA does? It would determine the psychological impact? Or is 90% of erectile dysfunction, is it physical? Or is it, go ahead.
Yeah, knowing the percentage of which, whether it is emotional, psychological, or biochemical, physical, that depends. And I know that's not a great answer, but it's true, because yes, each of those play a part. Just like we had talked about in the very beginning, like what has helped me to be a polymath and do the things. Is it the physical exercise, or is it the mental, curiosity and everything else? It's a blend. So it's the same type of thing. And one of the nice things is, there is a psychological, emotional aspect to erectile dysfunction. And we also have a section of your DNA reports in mood and behavior. How do you process information? How do you deal with stress? How is your recall on things? So we have areas that we can work on the mental health, psychological aspect of ED. Then, yes, there is another aspect, well, two aspects really, the biochemical aspect that works into the genes. How well do you have vasodilation? Because really, when you're talking about that little blue pill, that was originally studied and worked for cardiovascular health, because what it does is it helps with vasodilation, making the diameter of the blood vessels wider so you have better blood flow, okay? And it's just that erections happen to be a side effect, and they had this little light bulb going, oh, wait, we could make more money focusing it on erectile dysfunction rather than, cardiovascular health. So there are genes that we look at, like the NOS3, the nitric oxide synthase gene, that works with nitric oxide, the bioavailability, absorption for nitric oxide, because that is the molecule that helps with vasodilation. We look at the cardiovascular profile. We look at your detoxification pathways, because another aspect, biochemically speaking, for erectile dysfunction is toxins. How well is your body clearing toxins? And we're not talking about just glyphosate and all of these other mold toxicity or mercury or these external extraneous toxins, plastics, okay, that we are constantly be inundating with. I'm also talking about endogenous, the toxins from the inside that we produce just through natural cellular metabolism. Basically, like, okay, we have our home. This is like our cell, all right? We go out, we buy groceries, we bring the groceries into our home to consume. Like our cells, we have those basic nutrients that I was mentioning earlier, your B vitamins, C, magnesium, calcium, come into the cell, okay? We do the processes, we eat the food, and we generate trash. The cell generates its own kind of trash. Well, that trash has to be brought out, okay? We need to put it out. And generally, we have some sort of, garbage collector that picks it up and brings it to the dump. Well, our bodies naturally will bring it out. It has processes to do this. And the liver, which is, one of the main organs that helps with that detoxification process, with bile and pooping out those toxins, and the kidneys and peeing out the toxins and everything else. But if we have problems with that process of detoxification, guess what? You're throwing a wrench in the system. That garbage is not getting taken out, and all of a sudden things are starting to smell. The rats are coming in, and there is a disruption of our natural processes. You start going downstream. How does that show up? Erectile dysfunction. And this also works into these compounds like glyphosate that I was saying, these plastics, soy, and other foods that we eat that are what we call phytoestrogens or xenoestrogens, basically these estrogen type molecules that in the system increases estrogen levels. And if we are not processing that out, men are becoming estrogenized. And that's throwing off that natural balance. And it can lead to erectile dysfunction.
Yeah, it's fascinating because, again, you've said it multiple times today, we go to the cause of, sorry, we go to the symptom, we don't go to the cause. And what is the effect of mold? Because we know I'm allergic to mold. I grew up, it created my asthma for me. I was living in a house full of mold in England, and nobody thought about it. How does mold affect us physiologically? And can you actually get rid of it? Because once it starts growing in you, what do you do?
So yeah, mold, it is unfortunately ubiquitous, meaning that it can be found in many, many places. I actually lived in a moldy home myself. Mold can affect many different systems in the body. It affects the respiratory system. So it can show up with like chronic coughing, wheezing, sinus congestion. It can incite asthma. Okay. It directly affects the immune system. Because it does affect our gut biome. Our gut biome is our immune system for the most part. It really is. And that can actually show up. You're being sick a lot, frequent infections, chronic inflammation, and that can actually incite autoimmunity. It affects the cognitive effects. So brain fog, memory loss, difficulty concentrating. And this can seem similar because it's like, oh, I had that. Now, a lot of it was medication induced, but I also had that because places that I lived in had mold. So it only enhanced that issue. But it also, mold causes fatigue, low energy, even mood swings, anxiety, depression. It disrupts sleep. Another thing, cause nosebleeds. I would notice bad dreams. Like I said, dealing with the gut health, because it disrupts the gut biome. gas, bloating, well, more so of bloating and the disruption, but diarrhea, constipation, or the constant back and forth between the two. It puts more of a burden on the liver. Remember, I said the liver is, one of the main organs for detoxification, and that the liver can be overburdened with mold. It directly affects hormones, thyroid dysfunction, adrenal fatigue. When you have this imbalance in your hormones, guess what? That's going to affect, the functioning, of the sex organs for both men and women, especially, and even with the cardiovascular effects. So here, this is something that we look at because I work with people who have mold. I dealt with it and I, cleared that up myself. So now that I've, painted this horrible picture and going, oh my gosh, now what do we do? Yes, there is something that can be done. There are detoxification protocols. There are, different things that need to be taken care of. Number one is stop the exposure. Get yourself out of that moldy house. Or if you can't, see what you can do to mitigate, to clean it up. I actually did a podcast where I interviewed Jason Earl of Got Mold. Brilliant guy, absolutely incredible. And, that's something, an episode I would definitely say listen to, learning more about mold. I know, like Dave Asprey did a free documentary moldy movie because he had mold as well. I mean, it's out there and there's so much that they get into talking about how it affects the body and where it comes from, because mold, being affected by mold is not just from your environment, it's also in the foods that you eat. Right. So that's another thing, in your coffee, in nuts, in foods that are coming from overseas. Jason Earl was saying that when these large containers of foods, they may not have very much mold when they're being shipped out from the home port, but when they get over here, the mold content is terrible. So we have to look at all of the different places that mold can be present. So with that, that's what we look at. First and foremost, let's mitigate the exposure. Then we look at your genes. Where are you weak? Where do we need to support for you personally? And we look at, four of the major detoxification pathways: methylation, glutathione conjugation, glucuronidation, antioxidation. Antioxidation works specifically in the mitochondria, because we aren't going to be doing anything if we don't have the energy for our cells and to do the things that we're going to do. So if you're weak in that antioxidation pathway, well, then I know, okay, we need to make sure to focus on the antioxidants, on mitochondrial health, on ways to make sure that we can clear out old and worn out mitochondria and cells so we can bring in new healthy ones. And there are lifestyle techniques, dietary changes, and other things, biohacking techniques that can help do that. Methylene blue, red light therapy, doing hydrogen water, or, but really, if that's more outside of what's available, eating bright and rich colored fruits, berries, vegetables, eating healthier, stop putting so much of the burden on the body and start supporting where you are weak. And that, between some very specific protocols, detoxification protocols for mold, there are always ways, to help clean the body. I do want to say, though, I'm sorry, I don't want to, step on your toes here, but when it comes to detoxification protocols, please, I'm talking to your audience, don't just Dr. Google or say, mold detox protocol, and then just do that yourself, because you could end up causing more problems if you do it wrong, and end up with some Herxheimer reactions, which are more reactions of hard flu-like reactions that are very uncomfortable if you don't do it the right way. There is a specific way that it should be done. And you really should, work with a practitioner who knows what they're doing.
Yeah, I think there's some other things I want to talk specifically about. But I'm sure people are thinking right now, how do you get the DNA test? What's the process? What's the time frame? I know because I've done it, but I'd love for you to explain to people, how do you get all this information?
Okay, so the best thing to do is you can go right onto our website, thednacompany.com, and you can order a test right online. You can also download our app, the DNA Way app. It's on, all of the platforms, Apple and wherever you get your apps to download, it's available. And that our app actually has educational information. Even if you don't have your DNA right now, it has information for you. It also is a great one-stop shop to access our podcast, our webinars. You can sign up for future webinars on there. You can look at past webinars on there. You can, if you've already got some DNA done, say you did a 23andMe, you can actually upload that file and we will generate information, for our reports, even though unfortunately a lot of them do not have all of the information that we provide, because we don't do just SNPs, single nucleotide polymorphisms, which most of them do. We also look at copy number variants. We look at insertion deletions. So there are other aspects that we do, but if they would like to purchase one of our tests, go right to the website, or you can go on the app and you can actually order it from there. And if you are interested in working with a practitioner, diving deeper, having someone take a look and help walk you through the understanding of it and actually how to action the items of making these changes, we've got many different programs that can fit virtually everyone's budget and what their goals are. And we've got a great team, our sales team, that they can talk to see which program would be a best fit for them. And I will say that we do a lot of focus on men's and women's health, and we are talking hormone health. Actually, I know that this podcast will be coming out after we have our He Summit, but next week, we are having a He Summit where we're going to be diving into erectile dysfunction specifically. We are having wonderful speakers. One of our co-founders, Kashif Khan, is going to be on there. We have the founder and CEO of OsteoStrong will be on there. Dr. Johnny Bowden. We've got Dr. Jeff Nuzard he's the CEO for Sexual Wellness Centers of America. We have one of our own incredible practitioners, Justin Harris, and they're going to be talking about this. And the wonderful thing about it is that they're doing it live. So people will be able to ask questions and talk about this. It's for 3 days. And another nice thing, if people don't hear about this until after the summit, they can go back and purchase the recordings and get all this brilliant information, action items, to really make a difference. And then again, if they want to find out about themselves, about their own genetics, they can purchase our test anytime.
So what's the process of the test? How does that work?
Okay, so it's a saliva test. Now we've had tubes before, but we are switching over. So some tests now are a swab. Okay. But I think we might still have some that are the spit. So it works off of the saliva. Just follow the directions on what it says, and you mail that back into us. And it is a prepaid return label. And I believe it's FedEx, because we have had people bring it to the post office, and of course ends up getting lost and not getting back. So just, pay attention to the directions on that. So that way it does get back to us in a timely manner and we can process it. So in the processing, it takes about 4 weeks. for the lab to do their thing and to generate the results. And then you will get notified through the email that you've signed up for of the results. And then really from there, it's a very wonderful laid out structure of 7 systems that we cover. We do mood and behavior, sleep, cardiovascular, anti-inflammatory, which is your detox pathways, hormones and fitness, diet and nutrition, and longevity. So those are the 4 major systems that we cover, and then all of the genes that are involved. And we have your own little gene cast where you'll have, a recording telling you, okay, here's your gene. This is the genotype that you have of it, and this is what it means. And then there's information on, okay, here's what's going on with this. This is, a rundown of how this, impacts your life. And here are some, recommendations for diet, lifestyle, supplements, things like that. Now, one thing I do want to say, and this can sound wonderful, it's like, oh, well, that's all that I need. Well, yes and no. That depends, because that information is only based on your genes. Your genes, like I said, is your blueprint. That is very, very important, but it's only half the story. Nature, nurture. The nature is your DNA. The nurture is your life and experience, the epigenetics of all of the things that you have gone through, the physical stresses, the chemical stresses, the emotional stresses, all of your lives, the traumas, the experiences, the good, bad, and otherwise. Those things that have influenced the expression of your DNA that has brought you to the place where you are right now, that is the other half of the story. And that is very important for us to know, to truly get into personalizing the help that we provide. Because I've got your genes, but I also need to know, what kind of diet do you have? Have you had mold exposure? Have you had an injury? Were you on birth control? Have you taken a lot of antibiotics in your life? All of those things matter to what have brought you to this point right now. And then how do we move forward?
No, it's fascinating. And again, having done it myself, I highly recommend getting as much information, but then taking action on the information too. There's a couple of things that I really want to delve into before we end this podcast. There's been so much, and I've seen a huge explosion, really, of breast cancer. And I believe misinformation on genes that doctors are reacting off of. And this is just with the little research that I've done for mastectomies. Go ahead and tell us, what is going on?
Well, first of all, it's absolutely a shame when I see people, they hear, oh my gosh, I've got the BRCA mutation, or I've got the BRCA gene, and they rush to have their breasts removed. Unfortunately, that happened with my sister-in-law. She didn't have breast cancer. Her sister did. So she was scared to death and had herself tested, realized that she had the mutations, and went and had her breasts removed. And unfortunately, she didn't consult with me or ask me about it, which was, again, very unfortunate, because it didn't need to be that way. And that's where I get very frustrated with our society and what we're doing, because it is so pushed on fear. We remove the agency from people to let them know there are other options. Just because someone has a BRCA mutation does not mean they are going to get breast cancer. There is plenty of a percentage of women and men, actually, who have a BRCA mutation who never get it. So what I do is I look at DNA, lifestyle, all of those things, and say, okay, I'm looking at your terrain, I'm looking at the roots, and I'm saying this is what we need to do to make sure you're part of that percentage that doesn't get it. But specifically for the BRCA, and this is something that's important for people to understand the difference, is that the BRCA gene does not, and actually there's a couple, there's the BRCA1 and 2 genes, okay? They actually are tumor suppressor genes. They help to repair DNA damage and maintain that genetic stability. They do not cause breast cancer. They are actually extremely crucial for preventing cancer. And what ends up happening is that when there is a dysfunction in it, there is a mutation, it loses its ability, not totally, but it does not repair that DNA damage properly. Okay. It doesn't mean that it doesn't at all. It doesn't do it as well. Okay. So you're thinking, well, yeah, but wouldn't that mean that someone can still get breast cancer? Well, yeah, they can. It's associated with a higher risk, with more aggressiveness of, that particular cancer. But is it a death sentence for it? No. And this is where looking at the toxic load, because that's really where it comes down to that. Remember how I talked about endogenous toxins, what our bodies make inside? Well, one of those endogenous toxins are sex hormone metabolites, specifically estrogen metabolites, because men and women, we all have estrogen. We all make it. Okay. It's just the ratios are different between men and women. So when we have estrogens, and there are three types of estrogens, okay, there's E1, E2, E3. So estrone, estradiol, estriol. And these get metabolized to get broken down and cleared out of the system. It's this beautiful cycle. But when we look at your genes, we can see how well are you breaking them down, metabolizing them, and in what forms? Because there are three main estrogen metabolites: the 2-hydroxyestrone, 4-hydroxyestrone, and 16-alpha-hydroxyestrone. The 4 and 16-alpha-hydroxyestrones are more inflammatory. They have a much stronger estrogenetic effect and therefore can cause more inflammation in the system. And remember how I told you about inflammation? Inflammation being a root cause of the majority of diseases that we have and chronic conditions. So I can look at your genes and see if you are making and metabolizing, some of these estrogen metabolites more than the other. Because if you are, then I know what to do to help, kind of feed that over so that way you're not doing that, and how to help support your detoxification pathways so you're clearing them better. So you don't have the buildup of inflammation, the problems where you'd end up with DNA damage, where we would have to put pressure on the BRCA genes to have to do that DNA repair, which they're not doing so well. So do you see this like domino effect? Everything is affecting everything else. You just have to know where to look. Don't focus on the branches, focus on the roots and the soil.
Yeah, I have a dear friend of mine who the doctor told her she had the BRCA gene, and within a week she'd had her breast removed. And it was so sad because she didn't have breast cancer. He was told that you're going to get it because you have the BRCA gene. Well, like you said, everyone has it. So it was, and I saw a huge rise. It seemed to me, and this is just my opinion, that it became a moneymaker. It was a way to be able to use people's bodies against them for financial gain. That's just my personal opinion, because the rise was unbelievable in the amount of operations being done. And thank you for sharing that, because I think it's so important that we put out the fear, because fear will create stress. It will take down our immune system, and it can stimulate the inflammation that then leads to disease anyway. And education is so critical. So thanks for sharing that. Okay, this is a hot topic, really hot topic. Ozempic and semaglutide peptides. I know those are two very hot topics right now in health, wellness, and being pushed so hard. And I have my own ideas as to what I think is going on. But do you have a lot of experience in those scenarios?
Well, I do have some experience, yes. And I've also done a lot of research into it. So, Ozempic, these semaglutides, really what those drugs are doing is they are leveraging the GLP-1 receptor and pathway. Now, People are probably saying, what the heck is that? It happens in the gut. Our guts naturally make GLP-1. GLP-1 is a protein that actually is like a trigger that says, stop eating, I'm full. Okay. And I'm really generalizing this for better understanding. So you can think of it like a way of, you know how we go to the gas station and put, the gas handle in there, and there's like this little metal click thing that you can put it there so that way you don't have to hold it while it's filling the gas. Okay. So it's filling the gas tank, and all of a sudden, click, and it stops. No more, you're not feeding in more gas, take it out, and you're done. Well, GLP-1 is like that. So you're eating food, and what the GLP-1 does, it's like that little click. It says, okay, done. And there are a host of other genes that we look at that work into that gut-brain connection, okay? Because there's actually 10 to 15 times more neuronal information connections going from the gut to the brain than there is the brain to the gut, okay? And we look at genes that look at the efficacy of that, all right? Because again, there's other factors. We've got to be very careful about taking just one gene or one protein and saying, that's the only one. No, they don't exist in a vacuum. They all work as a team. But this is an impactful gene and an impactful protein that the pharmaceutical companies have leveraged. So what ends up happening is they do that and it slows things down. Really what happens is that for the milligram amounts that they are prescribing, it's slowing the transit time. Now, what I mean by transit time is when you eat food, chew, swallow, digest, stomach, small intestines, colon, and then pooping it out. So from the time that you eat food to the time you're pooping it out, that's considered your transit time. Now, a relative healthy transit time is like 16 to say 36 hours, 24, obviously like the 16 to 24 is better. When you start extending that in more of that 48, 72, over, part of the problem with that is that the whole purpose of pooping things out is getting rid of waste. If you are constipated or if you are not getting out the waste products, your body is reabsorbing it. It is not the full solids, but the toxins. You are constantly recycling those toxins. What is that doing? It's putting more pressure on the liver. Remember, we talked about the liver. Okay. So it's already got enough work to do. Let's not overburden it. Okay. So what this does is these semaglutides, they slow down that transit process to the point, because what it does, it makes you feel full and not want to eat, because your body's like, yeah, I got enough. I don't need anymore. I'm good. So that's a problem, because it actually upsets what we call peristalsis. It is that muscular massaging of movement to get the food through your gastrointestinal system. It slows that down. How can that be good? So now we are disrupting the gut biome. We are disrupting the normal processes. We are now providing an environment to constantly absorb more and more toxins that our body's trying to get rid of. So that's why you get a lot of these symptoms, a lot of these issues, and people not feeling well. Well, no wonder. You're just overloading your body with more and more toxins, putting more and more pressure on your liver. And of course, you're not going to be feeling well. Now, am I going to throw the baby out with the bathwater? No, I'm not saying that they are totally horrible, because there has been some research evidence, anecdotal information from doctors, prescribing doctors. Now, I am a doctor. I am not a medical doctor. I do not diagnose or prescribe. I am a PhD. Okay. So there is a big difference in that. I am a board certified holistic healthcare practitioner, and I am a certified functional genomics practitioner. I am certified in functional nutrition, but I do not diagnose or prescribe. these drugs are by prescription only. They are very expensive. And a lot of times they are prescribed without any other alterations in lifestyle or diet. And I'll tell you, if that's the case, you will never get off of them. You will always need to be on them. And it's like, do you constantly want to inject yourself with a needle for the rest of your life? It doesn't sound like fun to me, where it has been found that if the injections, if they are used, and there is a caveat to this. Remember, I told you that they oftentimes are given at higher milligrams. And we're talking what, like 4 milligrams, I think. I don't remember exactly. But if it is given in a microdose, much smaller, like 0.2, I believe, injection, that can be enough to just kind of help get things going. But it has to be coupled with diet and lifestyle changes. These other, cleaning up the terrain and the soil is absolutely paramount if you really want good overall health and not have the horrible side effects you've been hearing about them. So when you do that, then yes, you can get off of them and still retain that weight loss and continue to move forward. I personally try to have people clean up their terrain, do what they can first without that. If they really need it, then no, I'm not going to shame them for it. I am not going to say, oh, no, you shouldn't do that. No, if they are following someone who has the foresight to go, I'm not going to give too much. I'll microdose low and slow, see how it works while all the rest of the cleanup is being done. That's the way to do it. Because again, personalized medicine. We need to stop thinking that everyone needs the same thing all the time forever. Our bodies don't work like that, and we don't all react like that. So it really needs to be very personalized.
I can really feel your passion as you're talking about it coming out. It's probably the most assertive that you've been in the whole conversation at this point, which is great to see. I think some of it is that people don't want to put the work in, the cleanup, the lack of discipline. You want the quick results. But I've heard, and we see so much out on social media these days that we don't even know what the truth is anymore. But I've heard that people that take Ozempic, they're looking at the numbers, not the health. And they get excited because they see the weight loss coming on the scale, not understanding what's happening inside. So, two-part question. First off, I've heard that about 80% of the weight loss is actually muscle, which means that your BMI, your fat percentage actually goes up, which is unhealthy and can lead to immobility because we don't have the muscle strength to actually move. And then the other question, if they're addicted to this now, right? The number, I've got to stay in there. I'm feeling better weight-wise psychologically. What's the long-term damage? Because if we're not, like you said, cleaning up the environment, are we actually doing more damage in the long run that becomes harder to correct?
Those are really good questions. I mean, when you consider that these semaglutides, they haven't been out for that long. I mean, they've been out, but they've become a lot more popular. And I do blame society on the way that we view what health is or what health should be, like what's most important. It becomes very superficial, like just looking at that number on the scale for weight instead of saying, am I truly healthy? Because I will say, I mean, we've actually worked with people in the health field who are, bodybuilders and athletes. They can have the most perfect looking bodies, look like, oh, they are the picture of health. They, are in such great shape. But then you look at their labs, you look at how they're feeling and really starting to get into that. It's horrible. Their biological aging is, way up there. They may be, say, early 30s, but their biological age says they're 60. Now, I'm not saying that all of them are, okay? Not saying that at all. I'm saying that do not be deceived by the physical to that totally equating for health. I mean, look at some of the bodybuilders and other health gurus that have died of a heart attack, putting too much pressure on themselves, or top athletes dying of a heart attack or of some, cancer or, whatever the case may be. So as far as, these semi-glutides and looking at the weight. So yes, you're right that, they see the weight coming off, but a lot of it, if they are not combining that with an exercise schedule, again, doing that whole circle aspect of lifestyle, dietary changes, that shift in composition and body composition is definitely going to change. And they probably are still having other issues, because weight is not the only indicator of good health. Obviously, we just talked about that. But when you're talking about body composition, BMI, the amount of fat that someone has, I mean, you've got two different things here: subcutaneous fat and visceral fat. Subcutaneous fat, now, although it's probably a little more unsightly and, can create a little bit of that muffin top or whatever else that we don't want, which is more so inflammation. That's a little more unsightly, but it does not have the detrimental health effects like visceral fat. And that is fat that is underneath the muscle around the organs. That's where a lot of the real dis-ease can stem from. And I also want to mention, because we had done a She Summit last month about this, we focused it on osteoporosis and bone health. If you don't have muscle tone, lean muscle mass, if you are not exercising and moving your body, guess what's going to pay the price? Your basic structure, your skeleton, your bones. And that's why it's called the musculoskeletal system, because they work symbiotically together. So you have to have that, and you have to work the muscles and have that lean muscle mass to build stronger bones. So you and people who are only sticking with and using Ozempic and these other semi-glutides and not taking care of their overall health are doing so much more detriment in the long run. I don't want to sound so fatalistic, but if you don't take control of your health and really start cleaning things up, I can guarantee you that there will be some dis-ease that will manifest. I don't know exactly how that will look for you, for, the audience, each individual. That kind of depends on their genes and on their history, but it's going to happen, because these mechanical, biological, suits that we are wearing, they can wear out. That's what we call aging. And it is that constant inflammation that quickens it.
You're a mine of information. It's great. I really appreciate all this. So I have one other question that leads on from that. You talked about the visceral fat around the organs that we know stops the organs from working, and the greater the squeeze, I call it the squeeze because it's slowly constricting the organ from being able to function properly. How much of taking Ozempic is the visceral fat being taken out, or is that really not being touched? It's really the exterior fat that we're visually seeing.
That's a really good question. And I honestly have not looked into the specific effects of which type of fat it's actually affecting. That's a really good question. I'm going to have to look into that.
There you go. Now, because I found something, maybe the one thing, but again, I know, look at your history. Once you want to know something, you'll go find it out and do that. No, it's been brilliant. So people that are listening today could probably tell that I've been a little sick. I was out at a speakers convention this last week, and getting back here has been a couple of bad days. And I want to finish with a tip here that you gave me. We both come from musical theater backgrounds. We actually have a lot more in common than you even maybe know about myself. But I had this, I couldn't even talk this morning properly. And then I put together a little concoction that you actually knew about as well, that I used to have when I was singing in Lord Andrew Lloyd Webber shows to get through the show. Go ahead and tell me, because I'd love to leave this with everybody. When they're getting a little bit sick, or they've got a sore throat, or they've got to start talking, go ahead and tell me what you were saying.
So I like to have hot honey lemon water, and I put a little extra twist on there. So really what this does, It helps, it gives the vitamin C. It helps to support the liver. There's so many wonderful aspects to help boost the immune system. So really what it is I get my favorite mug and I get organic lemons. I don't use lemon juice in the bottle. That's plastic, all that. No, I go get myself an actual real organic lemon. And depending on the size, I'll either use a half or I'll use the whole lemon, squeeze that in my mug. Then I will put either Manuka honey or I will do honey from a local apiary. Now, you're probably going, what's an apiary? Okay, this is like a beekeepers or areas that that care for bees and collect honey, pollen, make propolis, things like that. So you want to have it from local area because those bees have been pollinating the local flora. And that's what you're breathing in. That is what your body is being exposed to. So you have other benefits of that through the nutrients from the local flora to be able to help with possible allergies. So it's very good to have something, from local honey. So you've got your lemon, you got your honey. Then what I do is I put obviously your hot water, and I do a splash of apple cider vinegar. Again, looking for something organic. And if you have any farmers markets, local farmers, a lot of times they will actually make their own. Back in, well, I live up in Vermont, and even in northern New York, we had Amish farms and farmers. So I would get apple cider vinegar that they actually made. You can actually make it yourself if you're so inclined. But there are some also good products, in box stores that you can get. So splash of that apple cider vinegar, and then I will take ginger root, like an actual real ginger root. We're not talking, the packaged stuff. Go for Whole Foods. Peel that skin, take a grater, and I grate some of that ginger in there. And a little tip about the ginger root, because if you don't use it very often, it can mold and get bad quickly. I throw it in the freezer. Frozen ginger root, it's easy to cut off the skin, grate that, put it back in, and it lasts a lot longer. So that's what I do. Hot honey lemon water with apple cider vinegar and some fresh ginger root. And I'll tell you what, it tastes so good. Makes you feel better, helps with, the throat, helps with your immune system. It's just a wonderful thing. And you can even have it as a preventative measure as well.
Yeah, thanks so much for sharing that. It certainly helped me get through today. And I was really determined to get on with you. I've been trying to get you on this podcast for months, so I wasn't going to let it go. It's not about sickness. Finally, after we've gone through almost 2 hours without me really coughing, and now
You're doing great.
It's been fantastic. So the last thing that I always ask people to leave with is, if there's one thing that you could let the world know that would be your legacy, what is the one thing you'd love everybody to know?
The one thing that keeps coming up, be kind to yourself. Having that belief system, allowing yourself to make mistakes, but to pick yourself back up and keep moving forward, having that curiosity, that motivation, the drive to do whatever it is that you have, but giving yourself that grace, that kindness to keep going and to understand it's not perfect, but you are perfect at this moment in time where you need to be doing what you're doing. So I would say be kind to yourself, give yourself grace.
That's beautiful. I so appreciate it. There's so many more questions I'd love to ask you. I'm sure we're going to have to
Another episode.
reach out and do another episode. I'm sure people would love to hear that as well. But thank you so much for sharing your time with us, just as much sharing all your knowledge. And you truly are a miracle in everything that you do, which again is so inspiring. When you went through what you went through, you had no idea how you could inspire others, but you've really taken that and gifted the world. So thank you so much for being here with us on Born Superhuman. And I look forward to seeing you soon again.
Dan, thank you so much for everything. This opportunity, I really appreciate it. So many blessings. Thank you.
Thank you.